Chapter 8 Brothers in Arms. It took some convincing. Darved's first attempt to explain his plan earned him a whack around the head with a farming rake, courtesy of Gweth. When he'd composed himself and Sulan had bandaged his long suffering scalp, he tried again. By the third attempt at explanation, the tribe was coming around to the idea. Jabbo took Sulan aside as Darved scratched diagrams into the dirt, ignoring the half-hearted insults thrown at him. "You've spent the most time with this man, Sulan. Can we trust him?" "Yes, I think so, Chief. He's had chances to escape, like when we bloodwashed Nido, and he didn't run. Also, if the Sisterhood are killing men, then he will want us to defeat them. If we don't win, he faces death. And what of this plan of his? Do you think it will work? If the men are brave enough, and the Sisterhood are stupid enough, it will work." "Those are two huge ifs, Sulan." Jabbo turned to her war council. Darved had finished his diagrams. The women were studying them, and some older ones were nodding. "This is our plan then," Jabbo declared. "Make sure you all know it well." Preparations continued throughout the morning. They dragged Darved's cage to the lower end of the village where more caves were constructed. Men emptied the high cave of the tribe's precious possessions to make room for the children. A chain gang formed, passing the items down the central path and stacking them in the lower hut. Sulan and Mosh took the young messenger girl, who declared her name to be Lisa, under their wing. The three of them set off to position themselves as far down the valley as they dared, as a warning party. Lisa was nimble on her feet, the swiftest in her tribe, she told them. The sky darkened. There was no mid-sun. Black clouds boiled over the ranges behind, and distant claps of thunder sent birds from their trees, taking flight for calmer weather. Women shared ideas on what this sign might mean for the coming fight. "I'll tell you what it means," Jabbo said when she overheard the chatter. "It means our mother is angry that we're being threatened, and she's coming to join us in battle. That's what it means." Darved and his workforce had constructed 3 more cages at the bottom of the village. His team comprised those men with enough wits about them to cut bamboo, 2 stronger women to push the cage sides up into position, and Ziba and another of her weavers to bind the sides together. Darved was very careful not to give the women any orders. He had to wait until they realized what was required, or he risked a swift cuff or kick up the backside. When he stopped Ziba's junior weaver from connecting the cage wall that faced the village, the women who hadn't been at the war council understood the plan. Darved then held his own council of sorts with the men. Later in the afternoon, with the first splatter of rain, Lisa came running back into the village, this time full of confidence amidst her new family. Mosh and Sulan followed close behind her, panting harder. "The Sisterhood are 1 hour away," Lisa announced. "At most." "How many?" came the cry from several women. "At least 3 dozen, all sword-armed," Sulan answered while Mosh and Lisa caught their breaths. She didn't wait for more questions, but jogged over to Darved for a progress report. Jabbo rallied her troops. "Okay, we all know what to do. Children, to the back of the high cave. Oh, and have a piss now if you need to. Don't you be pissing in my cave," she warned to lighten the mood. It worked. Some youngsters giggled. "Bow hunters! Where are my bow hunters?" Mosh and her 2 comrades with longbows came forward. "In the trees with you," Jabbo commanded. "Get comfortable. And remember, don't fire unless you're sure. I do not want to win this battle only to have one of your arrows poking out of my fine ass." She glanced around at the expectant faces of her tribe. "The rest of you, in front of the high cave, visible. I want these Sisterhood bitches to assume we're all up there, waiting for them. Arm yourselves, but hide your weapons. Now, where are all the men?" "Oh, there they are. In position already. Where's the bald one?" "Come here." Darved scurried up to Jabbo in the middle of the village. "Yes, Chief?" "Your plan is solid, but what makes you think the others are brave enough? They don't have those balls of yours swinging between their puny legs." "No, they don't have balls, Chief, but they do have a will to live. I've explained the situation to those that haven't heard of the Sisterhood. They may be men, but they're not stupid. Better to live a slave than die by a sword. They will fight for you. Also, they expressed a desire to defend their mistresses. I think that's the term." Jabbo looked confused, so Darv tried again. "Their owners," he explained. "They want to defend the women that keep them." "Ha! That's hilarious, manslave. Men defending women. Well, whatever their reason, as long as they play their part, I think this plan will work. What did you call it again?" "Shock and awe, Chief. Shock and awe." With everybody in position, the final orders went out to animal handler Jashi to unlock the pen containing their hunting dogs and bring a chicken over to the men. When she judged the Sisterhood forces must be upon them, she cut the bird's head off. The men lay sprawled in the mud, inside the cages, clubs hidden under them. Joshi squeezed in with them and covered everyone with chicken's blood. Some arrows jutting out between bodies completed the spectacle of a recent massacre. Up at the high cave, the tribe sat. Everyone bar the slaves, the bow hunters, and the children hidden inside. Should the plan fail and more conventional fighting ensue, then the last stand will be at the cave entrance. The sound of an approaching force reached them from the forest. The sisterhood were here. Jabu stood firm in front of her tribe. Someone whispered behind her. "Who gives the signal again?" Jabu turned to whisper over her shoulder. "The bald man decides when. We go when he goes." "Oh, mother," someone else whispered. "I'm being led into battle by a pair of testicles." "Just fucking charge when the men do," Jabu spat. The sisterhood were led by the same overbearing, overweight, and over-ugly matron, now dripping jungle wet and exercising very little caution. She blustered her way into the village, perhaps confident that the sword-wielding acolytes behind her would be sufficient protection. Mosh, positioned in a V of tree branches above the main pair out of the forest, could have buried an arrow in the back of the matron's head, but that was not the plan. She must wait. 36 black-clad fighters marched behind their leaders, all with shining silver swords drawn. Darved, feeling claustrophobic within the pile of dead bodies, whispered, "Be ready." Jabu shouted down at the invaders. "We've killed all our men," she gestured at the scene of carnage down the slope. "So, you can just piss off and bully another village." The matron looked towards the dead men and nodded to one of her disciples, who broke off from the group and started trudging down the slope to the cages. The matron and her group continued walking into the center of the huts. "Be that as it may," she huffed into the rain, blowing wet fringe from her eyes, "you still have to answer for the blasphemy of keeping men. I've also discovered that it was your tribe's women who ran from us at the slave market. There are fines to pay. Our mission of purging the land of men has its costs." "Bitch wants some payback, does she?" Jabu hissed under her breath. "What fines?" Jabu shouted down. Feeling the conversation was already absurd, were it not for the bald one's plan, she would have already marched up to this arrogant bitch and started clubbing. The sister sent to investigate the massacre was getting close. Darved could see her approaching feet from his squashed position under someone else's rump, and the matron's group were now almost between the huts. Then the final trigger he'd been waiting for. The black-clad figures, deciding the village posed no threat, sheathed their swords. "Charge!" Darved shouted. The front walls of the cages collapsed forward as all the men sprang to their feet. Brandishing clubs and screaming for their lives, they ran headlong towards the sisterhood, who turned to face them. Jabu led the opposite charge down the slope. All the adult women wielding their clubs, spears, and daggers descended on the enemy in a roaring rage. Jashi whistled to her dogs, a shrilling, piercing note that added to the clamor. 4 massive wolf half-breeds burst from their unlocked pens and bounded towards their prey. Mosh and her longbow hunters let their arrows fly. Mosh's arrow sliced through the rain and buried itself in the matron's neck. Other arrows found their marks, and 2 disciples fell with their leader. The hunters jumped down from their preachers. The battle was now a melee, with combatants too close for archers to target the enemy. Instead, they ran to join the fray. A massive thunderclap crashed over the valley, and the heavens burst forth in furious anger. A few of the sisterhood unsheathed swords in time to inflict terrible cuts on the first men that reached them. For many sisters, the confusion caused by being assailed from above by women, one side by dogs and the other by Mosh and friends, and most of all being charged from below by the blood-covered male corpses with unholy penises bobbling between their legs, was too much. In the torrential rain, they fell under swinging clubs, snapping teeth, and stabbing spears. Those men not proficient enough with a weapon dived around enemy legs and held them fast so their women could administer the killing blows. It ended minutes later, the sisterhood bodies strewn around the muddy choke point, red blood mixed with muddy waters, running in rivulets between the huts. A very dead matron made a fitting centerpiece of the bloody tableau. Jabu wiped gore from her chin with the back of her hand and raised her club above her head in triumph. "They picked the wrong fucking village, didn't they, mother?" She screamed above the thunder at the storming sky, rain cascading off her bare breast, washing her clean of the enemy's blood. The chief then surveyed her tribe. She counted some wounded among their number. Metal swords had sunk deep into flesh wherever they made contact. The healers would be busy for weeks, but it looked like she would not lose a single woman. The men had not fared so well. Being first to the fight, Darved included. A long gash tore through his midriff. Sulan sat beside him in the mud, supporting his head as he moaned in pain and coughed red spittle into her lap. Jabu took it all in as she stood over her vanquished enemy. She kicked the mother's fat, limp body. "Healers, attend to that man first," she pointed at Darved. "Darved, His name's Darved, Sulon sobbed. Yes, he has a name, doesn't he? Jabu said. Healers, treat Darved as you would treat a woman.